Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, for Autumn Leaves Behind the Scenes, our second program in our virtual field trip series. My name is Kevin Johnson with Appalachian Headwaters, and I'm here with Ivy Makia, my coworker with Appalachian Headwaters, who will be speaking in just a few minutes. I wanted to be outside because it's beautiful out. The fall weather changed. It changed to fall, really, at least where we are in Greenbrier County this week, which was perfect because this week was the autumnal equinox. And so we're talking about leaves. So I wanted to pick up some leaves here, right here on the ground. You got one of these leaves here. This is actually our state tree. Can you think of what that would be? It's a sugar maple. So we've got this beautiful sugar maple right behind me that's changing colors. And so we actually have some a little quiz for you all to start off. Ivy, if you could move it on.
Yep.
All right, so true or false? Leaves turning colors is a sign that the tree is dying. Think on that for a second. All right, well, the answer is false. Trees are going into dormancy, and changing colors is really just a natural part of its life cycle, which we'll learn a lot about from Ivy. So don't worry, they're not dying. All right, next one. Leaves change colors to protect themselves from bugs and animals during the winter. I don't change colors. Maybe I'll get a little red in the face if something's threatening me. All right, well, the answer is true, or at least partially true. And the red pigments in the leaf are particularly poisonous, the anthocyanins, which Ivy will talk to us about. An interesting fact you can impress people with. And moving on to our third true or false, we can predict when the leaves will change color every year. Now, I know there's plenty of weather people and other people who think that they can predict this, and they can get awful close, or maybe they get lucky sometimes, but the answer is false. There's a lot of factors that affect the color change in different leaves of different trees. And so we'll get into that during our presentation. Thank you so much for doing true or false with me. I'm passing it over to my coworker, Ivy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ivy. I work with Appalachian Headwaters as an environmental educator. A lot of my work is related to native plants. So what are we talking about today? We're going to be kind of going behind the science of the fall foliage that we see throughout the year. So that requires us to take a look at plant cells and the reactions and chemicals that are responsible for the colors that we see, as well as the factors that influence the color's intensity throughout the fall season. So the cells are the smallest unit of life. So you, me, bugs, cats, dogs, and of course plants are made up of trillions of cells that work really hard every moment of the day to keep us alive. So plants and animals are obviously pretty different. And really it's the biggest difference is in our cell types. Plants have a completely different cell types than animals. So we're going to take a look at that. Here is a pretty cool diagram of a plant cell. So like I said, we're very different. So we're going to look at those differences on a cellular level. One of the first things that is different about the plant cell is the presence of this cell wall that surrounds the cell that keeps everything inside of it where it needs to be and prevents things from invading the cell or things that don't belong there. It also protects the cell from bursting, from incredible amount of pressure from the changing water levels that it experiences all the time. And so it's really rigid, which is very helpful in keeping it tough and strong. Animal cells don't have this, which is why we are a lot squishier than plants are. And if you found a plant that was as squishy as we are, there might be something wrong with that plant. Another really special characteristic is the presence of these oval-shaped organelles. Like the way that we have organs inside of our bodies, cells also have organs, but they're super tiny, so they have a very different name. Well, not very different, so they're called organelles. A really important organelle for the plant cell is this chloroplast. This is where a really important reaction happens called photosynthesis, which is where the plant takes light energy and converts it into food, aka sugar. We're going to take a deeper look into chloroplasts. So this is a chloroplast, a diagram of a chloroplast, and this is a microscopic image of what the plant cell looks like with these chloroplasts in them. Now, these pancake-like structures are called the thylakoid. This is where light-dependent reactions like photosynthesis takes place. And this is not an understatement, or an overstatement, but photosynthesis is probably one of the most important chemical reactions in the world. This is where plants take the resources around them, specifically light energy from the sun, water, and carbon dioxide, which is in the air, to create magic, or in other words, oxygen and glucose, which is a type of sugar. And this is the reaction here written out. Glucose is really important for plants. This is how they get the energy to do almost everything. This is how they get the energy to put out leaves, to put out flowers, to put out seeds, you name it. They probably use glucose for it. One thing to know is that plants can't just take light and make sugar. They need kind of an intermediary step to get what they need from light. And what they use are these tiny green molecules called chlorophylls. They are responsible for capturing the light needed for photosynthesis and kind of converting it into a more usable source for the plant. Now, chlorophyll, like I said, are incredibly tiny. And so they are packed into these thylakoids, and the thylakoids are packed into the chloroplasts. And because they are green, the chloroplast is green. And because there's so much chloroplast within a plant cell, that's why plants are green to us, because of this chlorophyll and their abundance. Now, a pigment is a molecule that kind of takes on a color through absorbing and reflecting different wavelengths that exist within the visible light spectrum, which is this here. So a pigment can reflect basically any color on this that it wants to. And so chlorophyll can reflect green, therefore they look green to us. So I'm kind of going to jump to the factors that influence color intensity. One of them, of the two, is the length of night. So some of you may or may not know that during the summer, we get the longest days of the year, and then during the winter, we get the shortest days of the year. So as we are transitioning from summer into winter, the nights are getting shorter, or the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer, and trees are very receptive to that, just as receptive as we are. So they respond to this change by creating a layer that protects the tree from the outside world. So what that means is that it forms a corky layer of tissue called the abscission layer and cuts off its connection from the main tree to individual leaves, because eventually those leaves will fall off and the tree will then become exposed to the cold open air during the winter. So it does it as a way to protect itself from that. What's important to note is that during normal growing season, chlorophyll is constantly being broken down by the sun, the very thing that it is meant to absorb. So it is also being constantly replaced by newer ones. Now, when this connection between the tree and the leaves are disrupted, so is the transfer of nutrients and material from the tree to the leaf and vice versa. So this means that new chlorophyll can't get into the leaf. So essentially, once that abscission layer is formed, all it has left is whatever chlorophyll it had before that layer formed. And so the chlorophyll will keep doing what it needs to do, but it'll eventually kind of die off and disappear. Now, what's interesting is what happens after that, what it reveals as the chlorophyll go away. So let's look at this image here. I can't really hear what you guys are saying, so I'm kind of going to narrate it for you. Let's kind of point out some of the colors that we are seeing. I see green. Now, I did just talk about it, so you probably already know what pigment causes that color. I'll give you a second to shout it out. It's chlorophyll. Good job. So another color that we see in this photo, I see red. Maybe if we had a better look, we might even see purple. We also see shades of orange and yellow. Yeah, so these are the colors that we'll typically see during the fall: reds, purples, yellows, and orange. So the pigment that is responsible for the shades of purple and red that we see is called anthocyanin. And typically throughout a normal growing season, anthocyanins are made in the leaf, but they're not stored there. So they're almost immediately after they're made, kind of taken away to a different part of the plant. But as you can recall, there's an abscission layer that forms as fall progresses. And just the way, in the same way that new chlorophylls can't come in, anthocyanins can't leave the plant. So we'll get a buildup of anthocyanins, and that's why we start seeing those colors appear. Now, for orange and yellow pigments, those are produced by a group of pigments called carotenoids. Unlike anthocyanins, though, carotenoids are present in the leaf all year long. They're stored there. But the thing is, chlorophyll is so abundant and super green that it covers this color, so you just don't see it, but it's there the whole time. You will see it in instances where a plant will become stressed and maybe prematurely change colors. And so that's a sign that something wrong is happening because the chlorophyll is dying. And so you reveal those colors that you typically wouldn't see until fall. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at anthocyanins and kind of like how they show up. So as you can recall, because I just talked about it, anthocyanins produce the red and purple colors that we see in the fall foliage. And they are these complex molecules that are made in the presence of glucose or sugar. So without sugar, you wouldn't see this pigment. You wouldn't have this pigment within the cell. And if you can recall, chlorophyll is constantly being broken down and constantly being replaced because it is constantly absorbing light used for photosynthesis. And because there's such a high rate of photosynthesis happening, that means that really at any given moment, these glucose cells are kind of just floating around within the cell. These glucose molecules are floating around within the cell. And when that happens, and the abscission layer has then been formed, you get glucose kind of still sticking around inside of the leaf where it can go nowhere else. So then when you have this high supply of glucose, you then start seeing more and more anthocyanins pop up. And so you get that buildup in cells, and eventually the whole leaf becomes red and purple. So on to the last factor that influences color intensity is weather. So kind of like the vibrance of fall colors really relates to the weather conditions that occur before or during the formation of this abscission layer. And the two kind of components of weather that drives this is temperature and moisture. So if you want the best foliage for the year, the conditions that you would really want to see are clear, sunny days. We want sun because we want to see more glucose produced. and then followed by cool above freezing nights, because then that means less glucose is leaving the cells, as well as this abscission layer being formed. So you got more glucose trapped within the cells of the leaves. As you remember, when there's more glucose trapped, that means more anthocyanins pop up. So that's why we want clear sunny days followed up by cool nights, because then we get that purpley red pigment, the good stuff. So as for moisture, we want the soil that the tree lives in to be moist throughout the year. That's because when plants become deprived of water, they get stressed out. When they get stressed out, they tend to drop leaves or prematurely change colors. Now, when that happens, that really negatively impacts fall foliage. We don't want stress, so that's why they have to be adequately watered and have water. But yeah, on to Kevin. Oh, so I forgot this part, but if you witness cold, rainy days followed by warm nights, then you're going to get the opposite effect of what you want. And now on to Kevin.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much, Ivy. That always, chemistry was not my best subject, so it's always good to learn that from somebody who's better at that information. What a beautiful view this is in West Virginia. This is a fantastic time of year to come to West Virginia. Of course, those of us who are here know it's great to be here all year long. And so one thing that I've heard people talking about, and I know that some researchers are starting to study, is how is fall phenology, tree phenology, so fall foliage color change, related to climate change. And so we're going to dig into that just a little bit here. All right, so first of all, I wanted to point out this resource. It's kind of interesting, and there's other ones on the internet as well. This one is from SmokyMountains.com, their fall foliage map. And this is a projection for the week of September 20th, which we're still in. And you can see, looking at West Virginia right there, it shows Greenbrier County and Pocahontas County, some of the higher elevation parts of our eastern mountains, and also the Potomac Highlands, also up in Canaan Valley, are near peak. Now, that doesn't mean the whole county is near peak. As you all know, there's higher elevation and lower elevation. There's a lot of nighttime temperature difference, even within one county. So this is a pretty generalized idea of peak colors. Now, something that I learned in preparing for this is that leaf peeper industry, which is people coming to see the fall colors or taking special trips, like the train that comes from Huntington to Hinton, or the train in Cass. People do that to see the beautiful fall colors from up on high. Is a $25 to $30 billion industry. So a lot of people pay attention to these projections. Ivy will show us the next week, which is coming up real soon. Look how much it changes. So much more of the map is in yellow, so much more is moving towards orange and even the deeper red, including here in West Virginia. But you can see there's a variation in the state. And then moving on to the week of October 4th, you can see even some of our counties here in the Greenbrier Valley where we are past peak typically based on the weather of this past year. And then finally, we have the week of October 11th, which in my mind, mid-October is where we usually get to our peak colors here in West Virginia. Now, what does that mean? Basically, peak colors is a pretty gross generalization about, if I'm looking at the mountains, looking at the forest, that there is the deepest and broadest range of colors that I can see. And something that's really interesting that they do to determine whether the color change is happening earlier or later is they have to look at historical photos from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, as far back as they can, and try to determine when peak color was at those times to see if it's changed over time. Okay, well, let's take a look at the next slide. How will climate change affect fall colors? So first of all, we need to have a definition of climate change, which is a change in the average weather conditions, temperature and rainfall in a region over a long period of time. Okay, I know you all probably have heard other definitions, and that's just fine. This is from NASA. So here's some of the things that some researchers think are mostly true. Researchers expect warmer fall weather could delay the start date. So as Ivy was talking about, the nighttime temperatures make a big difference. And when the leaves start to develop, the trees start to develop that abscission layer, and then the leaves start to change color. Now, they have found that if it's warmer in the fall, that some tree species actually may start to change colors earlier, like white ash in one of the studies I saw. So it's going to depend on the tree species. They think it actually could lengthen the fall color season, which is something that I didn't expect. But because it's staying warmer, that means the nighttime temperatures aren't signaling the trees to develop that layer and set off that change in those leaves. So we could have a longer season in the future. They also think that it could deepen some of the colors due to more abundant leaves. Now, this is because of a warmer climate and perhaps also the moisture regime, that some trees will have more abundant leaves. It might look like there's a richer color because there's more leaves. Now, again, this is just something that they're starting to study. And something that I also learned was that autumn is not a very well studied time of year in general in science. And so maybe that's an opportunity for you all to study fall in the future, the part of fall that you like the most. Looking to the next slide, we have other things to think about with climate change and fall colors, and there's several. Extreme weather. So you probably heard about this. We had kind of a big drought here in the Greenbrier Valley this year. Other parts of the country had a real horrible drought. I don't know if you all remember 2-3 years ago, we had a pretty serious drought, and a lot of the leaves turned brown and just dropped off the trees with the first big storm. So we didn't have a whole lot of fall color that year. And the Mountain Hydrology Lab here at WVU has put out some pretty sophisticated projections of how here in West Virginia and Appalachia in general will have wetter weather and also drier weather. So that interplay will make a difference. I already said earlier that all tree species will respond differently. So we might have patches of color versus one palette of colors all at the same time. So something else that's really interesting is as the climate changes, trees, just like animals, have to move to the most appropriate weather or they might die. And so because climate change may change where certain trees are able to grow, then the colors that those trees produce in the fall will also either join our beautiful fall color palette or disappear. And another way that colors may disappear or the color range might change is invasive pathogens and pests. And actually, this is a bigger influence in the short term. You all may have heard of chestnut blight. American chestnuts were a dominant canopy species in our forest. They're all over the place. People still have like Chinese chestnuts and can roast those around the holidays. That's something people love to do. Those developed a really beautiful yellow color in the fall. And we don't have those. We have other species, but we don't have those chestnuts everywhere producing that. Another one that you all are seeing now is our ash trees are dying rapidly because of an invasive introduced by humans pest called the emerald ash borer that's quickly killing those ash trees. So they won't be part of the fall color spectrum. They'll be less a part of it in the future. All right, but we need to understand this better, like I said. So that's something for you all to investigate in the future. And like I said, some of these universities, like University of Richmond, they actually are taking photos from people whenever they can to compare the photographs to now. And they found that about every decade, let me make sure I've got this right, the peak foliage is delayed at about a day for each decade since 1935. That's kind of interesting. Okay, moving on. I just wanted to share some interesting tools. The U.S. Forest Service has this climate change atlas, and you can input individual species of trees, and it'll show you this distribution map of where those are concentrated now, and then how it might change with climate change, which could tell you something about the color spectrum as it changes over time. A lot of other great information there too. And then I can't help but talk about a little bit of the wildlife benefits of falling leaves. Some people feel real sad when the trees are gone, like all the colors we've gotten to peak color, but then this big windstorm comes and knocks all the leaves out of the trees, and it makes us sad, like winter's coming right up. But you shouldn't feel sad, because basically those leaves are nourishing all the wildlife and those same trees and plants for the next year. One of the critters that I'm fascinated with in the winter are lightning bug larvae. And sometimes you'll see a lightning bug larva. They look like tiny little dragons to me. If you ever tap a maple tree, they'll go right up there because they're hunting other insects that are attracted to that tree water. They live in the leaf litter all the time over the winter. And so those are the critters that will develop into the lightning bugs that we love in the summertime. So they're feeding in the leaf litter. Worms, rodents like shrews are active throughout the winter in the leaf litter. What am I forgetting? Birds, turkeys, foraging in the leaf litter. So, and of course, it's creating this really rich mulch, compost, basically, for those trees and plants to emerge healthy the next year. Let's see what we got next. I may be done, I don't know. I think there's one more slide. Oh, okay. And what are other ways wildlife use fallen leaves? This is something for you to think about. I took this photo on the Greenbrier River just a couple days ago. All of those little insects, those benthic macroinvertebrates that fish feed on, that become all the little flies that the fly fishermen like to use or mimic in their flies that they fish with, are feeding on these and have habitat underneath these leaves. The nutrients that come out of the leaves are also nourishing the whole river ecosystem if they're falling in water. Something else that I think of all the time is how squirrels use leaves to build nests. Chipmunks do too. You can see their little bunches of leaves up in the trees. I feel like they're going to fall out of the trees when the wind blows, but they're amazing builders using those leaves as well. So there's a lot of benefit to those fallen leaves. All right, well, I'll pass it back over to Ivy to wrap up for us.
Okay, so we can't really talk about fall foliage without also tackling the topic of phenology. So what is phenology? When you literally translate the word, it means the study of appearance. So the more accurate definition, I would say, is that phenology is the study of the timing of biological events in relation to changes in climate and weather conditions. So a phenological event can be hibernation, migration, when a tree puts out its first flower or first leaf, or when the leaves fall. So fall foliage and leaf fall is a major phenological event, and it's something that scientists are looking at very closely every year. So why is phenology important? Phenology allows us to develop a better understanding of how climate change is really impacting plants, bugs, and animals, really any life on Earth. Since these changes are happening on such a small scale, by consistently studying them, we get to monitor how evolutionary relationships that have taken lots of time to develop are changing in response to climate. And it's really easy to be a scientist because anyone could be a scientist. Anyone can record phenological events. I highly encourage you guys to go out in your neighborhood and adopt a plant to look after and to observe throughout the years, and report your observations to Nature's Notebook, which is a really cool program where anyone can upload their observations and they're actually taken in and as data. And it's really easy to sign up. There's really only 3 steps. If you're not old enough to sign up, you can ask a parent or guardian to sign up to be an official observer, and you and your whole family can take part in this kind of global mission to take care and look at what's going on in the world. Yeah. I know, Kevin, you wanted to talk about that cool leaf that you showed me. Yeah, wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about that.
Sure. I just wanted to, this is sort of a shout out to our presenter last week, Dr. Wickert, who we work with on a regular basis. I found this leaf right here, which you all may have seen before too. See how you can see the leaf veins, but basically an insect has eaten away all the rest of the leaf. And I just think that this is the most beautiful thing. Leaves are such important parts of insects' diets and other animals' diets. And they're just so beautiful, even once they've fallen. So I just wanted to share this. It's a skeleton. You can make prints out of this. Of course, people like to preserve leaves and make leaf prints themselves with paint. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. Hey, thank you guys for watching and listening to us. I'm going to open the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen first.